Welcome to the OR Today webinar series. OR Today is focused on giving back to the perioperative community through our monthly magazine, website, and annual OR Today Live Surgical Conference and Expo. Let's kick off today's webinar by giving away an OR Today Live tote bag to the attendee that can tell me which city will host our 2016 OR Today Live Surgical Conference and Expo. Use the question feature on your webinar dashboard now to answer this question. While you're answering, I want to remind everyone, we will award certificates of attendance for participation in today's webinar. To obtain your certificate, you must complete the post-webinar survey, which will appear immediately on your screen following today's call. If you do not see the survey, please email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. All right, and the winner of the OR Today Live tote bag is, looks like Lisa Sullivan. We're going to get your address shortly, but congratulations, you're our winner for today. Our 2016 OR Today Live Surgical Conference and Expo will be held August 28th through 30 in Chicago, Illinois. Visit ortodaylive.com for more information. OR Today would like to thank our sponsor, Censis Technologies. Census provides a flexible portfolio of surgical instrument tracking options using CentraTrack as a highly advanced web-based customer-friendly platform. Today we have two presenters, Dr. Nyla Ski-Jap and Jennifer Zola. Jennifer is a sales consultant for Censis Technologies. She has 20+ years of healthcare experience in a variety of hospital settings, including med-surg nursing, patient staff education, and clinical sales support of medical device solutions. Jennifer, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Jamie. Hello, and thank you for joining our session today. Our topic, as you know, is releasing the pressure of loaner management. My name's Jennifer Zola, and I'll kick off the presentation and then turn things over to our guest speaker, Dr. Nyla Jap, better known as Ski Jap. Our agenda is focused on taking a closer look at what is involved in effectively managing loaner trays in hospitals and surgery centers. I'm going to start with a brief overview of Censis Technologies, discuss the challenges that exist today related to loaner tray management. We'll look at loaner management system options, cover tips and best practices, and finally we'll end with some time for our guest speaker to address questions from the audience. So let's go ahead and get started. Censis is based outside of Nashville and Franklin, Tennessee. The company began R&D in 1999 and launched the first release of CensiTrack in 2002. Currently, Censis is the largest provider of instrument management solutions in the U.S. with over 450 customers. We're very proud of that. Censis offers the only software as a service web-based application in the market, and being cloud-based allows us to maintain all of our customers on the same release version, and it keeps our customer support efforts efficient and effective that way. It also means our customers don't pay additional fees for new releases. Since the launch of CensiTrack in 2002, we've averaged about 3 to 4 releases per year, and some of our highlights include we added multi-site functionality in 2005. We added the capability to have an interface to the OR scheduler in facilities in 2007. We added a loaner management module in 2008 and a scope reprocessing module in 2014. So our goal and mission is to make sure our customers have the right instruments in the right place and the right time to ensure they are in proper working condition. This is all focused on helping maximize OR throughput and support regulatory requirements, including helping to try to eliminate as many paper records wherever possible. Okay, so this is a schematic of what has to happen for a loaner set to show up on time for a specific OR case. So the first thing that you'll see is the doctor needs to let the vendor know he has a need for a particular set. And then the vendor needs to know when he can have that set available for the case. After that, the doctor is going to contact the hospital and schedule the case. And then the vendor needs to get the instruments to the hospital on time and also pick them up after the case. So that's kind of what's happening outside of the hospital. On the inside, what you'll see is that the vendor is going to drop those instruments off to the OR possibly, but usually to decontam. And then that tray needs to go through the facility's reprocessing loop to get them to the OR. And then after the case, the set will go back to decontam, where it's washed and cleaned and prepped for the vendor to pick it back up. And that's, at the point the vendor brings the set in and when they pick it up, a real clear, concise inventory needs to be captured to make sure what was checked in is also returned. Okay, and with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to our guest speaker, Dr. Nyla Ski Japp. She prefers to go by Ski. In addition to being a registered nurse with a doctorate in healthcare administration, Dr. Japp has over 35 years of acute care infection control experience. She was previously Vice President of Central Sterile Process Management for Integrated Medical Systems, and prior to joining IMS, she was the Senior Clinical Manager and Educator of CSPD at Banner Desert Medical Center in Mesa, Arizona. Her previous experience includes Regional Infection Control Coordinator at Providence Medical Center in Kansas City, Nurse Manager of SPD at the University of Kansas Hospital, and Director of Infection Control Services at St. Catherine Hospital in Garden City, Kansas. Over the course of her career, Dr. Japp has received numerous honors for her contributions to the central service profession and has served in the state and national levels of the American Society for Healthcare Central Service Professionals. She is currently serving as the Manager Representative for the Certification Board for Sterile Processing and Distribution Personnel Board of Directors. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Ski.
Thank you, Jennifer, and welcome everyone. I hope you all are having a great St. Patrick's Day, and I hope your weather is as pleasant as we are here in Phoenix. We're supposed to get up to about 87, 89 degrees, so my afternoon will probably be spent in the pool. But on with what we're here for. First of all, I would like to define what are we talking about when we talk about a loaner set. A loaner instrumentation, remember, it's a critical or a semi-critical medical device or trays that are used by a healthcare facility under an arrangement based on lending or a trial use of a new medical device. So if we describe that then, a loaner is instrument sets and their components that are not purchased by the facility. It's also a loaner set will be used for specialty surgery. And we know, all of us know how many specialties we have right now. It's unique. It has a unique configuration. And here's where we get into trouble a lot of times is with the multi-level trays. I have been in facilities when the whole tray would be pushed through the washer and not, the layers haven't been separated. We must remember, you must take those levels down so that we're ensuring that all of the products are being cleaned. Trays with organization graphics as well as nested trays. Okay. So why is there an increasing trend in the United States? The increase is due to our global marketplace. There's a lack of inventory space in our hospitals. There's a lack of inventory from not only the hospital, but as well as vendors may only have a couple trays. Clinical trials, patient-specific needs, and multiple cases with inadequate reprocessing time. The market issues that we see, technologies are always advancing, meaning there's consistent evolution of surgical procedures. Who ever thought that we would actually see a robot in our surgical suite doing the operation while the surgeon sat away from the table and controlled the arms of the robot? I certainly didn't back when I started my profession. However, these technologies are creating many, many challenges for the proper and the regular education in the operating room and in SP. You must be trained on every tray that comes into your facility. You must know what can be taken apart and what can't be taken apart. You must have timely delivery of the instrument sets, accompanied by current IFUs. And remember, these IFUs have to be in writing. They cannot be taken orally from your manufacturer rep that's bringing in those trays. Trays with graphics embedded in trays, creating sterilization challenges due to the specific needs of our sterilizer. Each set is different. Continued evolution of instruments. Okay, we're going to go back to market issues. Compliance with weight requirements and dry times. We cannot sterilize a whole bunch of metal mass density in a single tray. We have to remember 25 pounds is the maximum weight for our trays. Direct processing requirements for the same system, resulting in sets being wrapped, increasingly being susceptible to improper handling, not only by the sterile processing personnel, but also by the operating room personnel. Each set is different. We have to remember that DePuy makes trays, Stryker makes trays, a whole bunch of different manufacturers are out there making these trays. Okay, we can go to each set is different. Jennifer, you can change it. Continued evolution of instrument sets combined with the changing surgeon needs create trays and sets that vary in sterilization requirements. In the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, or what we call AMI, which is the Comprehensive Guide to Steam Sterilization and Sterility Assurance in Healthcare Facilities, in Section 10.9, it describes the need for product quality assurance testing of processed items and explains procedures for creating product families. And I hope that you have all done your product families with your product testing. Nothing should be routinely processed until your IFU shows that there are acceptable biological results as well as chemical indicator results. And you have completed a product testing on any new tray that would come into your facility. If you're not doing that, let me encourage you to start doing that, because the Joint Commission certainly may want to know that you have those different families of trays. The concern with implants, the most obvious concern, implants by definitions, it stays in the patient. Remember, I said it's either a critical or it's a semi-critical device. And those critical devices must be sterile. Why, what is the definition of an implant? A device that is placed into a surgically or a naturally formed cavity of the body if it is intended to remain there for a period of 30 days or more. The FDA may, in order to protect public health, determine that devices placed in subjects for shorter periods are also referred to as implants for purposes of this definition. Remember that when an implant is inserted into the body, It interrupts your blood supply and it manipulates the tissue around the implant, which then in turn will provide a beautiful spot for microorganisms the opportunity to creating a surgical site infection. So no, infections associated with implants may not be evident for up to 1 year after it has been implanted. We must question, however, how many of these SSIs actually do get reported. And I have a suspicion that we don't catch them all because they go into the physician's office. The physician office then will fail to get that information back to the hospital. So then what happens with this is the operating room is delayed on this case in the event that we have a delayed delivery. With a delayed delivery coming into the processing area, it can result in items not being properly sterilized. Now, why do I say that? The sets may become unfamiliar. The instruments may be different to what the Sterile Processing Department is accustomed to looking at. The assembly may be different, and the sterilization may be different in that we have varying cycle times that are different for these sets. Not every set may have a 4-minute sterilization cycle. Every set may not have a 30-minute cycle. So we have to know what are we dealing with when it comes to our loaner sets. Other operating room delays, there's many procedure-specific loaner sets that contain implants. AORN and AMI both recommend that you do not use immediate use steam sterilization, or what we used to call flash sterilization, for any implant. Rather than using immediate use steam sterilization, it's good if you would use the exception form for premature release of implantable device or tray that comes in the AMI ST79 book that AMI, if you don't have the AMI standards, the ST79 standards, you need to get that. There is in the back, in I believe it's appendix, it's A or B, and I can't tell you which one, but it will be back there in the book. And please remember, Sterile Processing will initiate that form because they're going to be the ones that are told, you know, we have to flash this. So the operating room must be responsible for completing all of the information on the form, documenting the reason that you had a premature release to begin with, and what could have been done to prevent the premature release of that device. Some devices in instructions for use do not support or don't even allow for immediate use steam sterilization. Other operating room delays, procedure-specific loaners, have multiple sets and trays ranging from you might have 3 trays that you need to process for a case. I have seen vendors bring 25 to 40 trays for a single case. How in the world, if those sets are brought in the night before at 7 o'clock in the evening, can you possibly have that many sets ready to go by 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning? I'm thinking you probably won't, and that will cause a delay in the operating room. There is lack of space in the Sterile Processing Department, resulting in stacking of the loaners. If loaners are wrapped in disposable wrap, what usually happens is we drag those trays across each other and we put holes in those wrappers. Those wrappers that become damaged must be reprocessed. And where do we start the reprocessing? In decontam. You cannot take those trays, just unwrap them in assembly, and then just put new wrap on them. They need to go through the entire sterilization process. So, communication challenges. There are so many touch points in loaner communication. One or more points missed can result in a delayed or a canceled case, or worse yet, a negative patient outcome. Surgery needs to know from the surgeon, and the surgeon needs to be communicating the need to the vendor. The vendor rep then will communicate with his company, then we'll get the surgery booked. The vendor trays will be delivered to the hospital and preferably to the decontam area 48 to 72 hours in advance of the procedure, and I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. Sterile processing will manage the loaner inventory, and education of the operating room and the sterile processing staff related to critical components of those trays. And then we have the journey again for the loaner set. Again, we have to remember how this process flows. We must always, if the trays are delivered to the operating room, where in some cases they may be, in smaller facilities, they may very well be delivered to the operating room, but the operating room then must send those down to the decontam area. And then the process will begin in decontam, and when it begins in decontam, certainly the sterile processing staff must take inventory of what is being presented to them.
So I'll just step in here for a second. In our experience when we go out and do assessments and assist our customers, we just wanted to point out a few things that we see. So in a manual system, you have many ORs know when the case is scheduled and when the set arrives in the core storage area, but they don't always see all the steps in the process without making additional phone calls from departments or to the doctor's office. We also see some hybrid examples out there. What facilities, in order to improve the visibility, what we'll see is that there's a couple scenarios. On the outside of the hospital, you may have an application that shows the communication between the doctor and the vendor, and that system may also let you know when the vendor brings things into decontam. And then some facilities may have an application that supports visibility to all the steps in the reprocessing loop, but doesn't provide the visibility on the outside of the hospital for all the communication between the vendor and the doctor's office. And really what we believe is the best scenario would be for all parties involved in the process to have visibility to all these stages. I mean, it's helpful if the SCD knows that there's a new type of set coming in, so they have time to educate their staff on the manufacturer's instructions for use. It's helpful for the doctor's office to know that the vendors drop things off in time for the case. It's good for the OR to know where things are in the reprocessing loop in order to be confident that that set's going to be there on time for the case. So visibility to all these steps in the process will be the key to help reduce delays, improve patient safety, and enhance productivity. So on that note, I'm going to turn things back over to Steve.
One of the very important things I think that must be remembered is you must remember that you must have a written policy. Why do we need a written policy? One moment. We need a written policy because it will define for us what we need to know and what we need to do. For example, you need to commit to following regulatory guidelines for cleaning and sterilization, and you can find this outlined in your AMI document. Establish a delineated time frame for vendors' delivery of loaner trays to the facility. SPD instrument tray turnaround times must be examined to determine the appropriate time necessary to process the loaner trays along with the hospital-owned instrument trays. The following you want to maybe try to consider when you're developing a protocol. What's the total tray processing time? Now, when you look at that, you also need to include the cool down of those processed trays. That, too, is part of the overall time. Appropriate staffing to process the extra workload. Because if you're going to have 25 to 50 additional trays come in, you're going to need to have a whole lot more hands putting those trays together. You need to have the time of the scheduled procedure and the number of sets that are being brought in. Processing and chamber capacities of all the washers and sterilizers have to be looked at. You may not have the capacity in your processing department to be able to process that many trays. So that all needs to be defined and looked at. The manufacturer recommendations for cleaning and sterilization must always accompany the trays. And my motto when I was managing was this: if I didn't have the IFU, then I did not process the tray. And I think that's a good philosophy for all of us out there that are processing these trays. Determine what steps then will be taken to address loaner trays that are delivered outside of the established time frame and without the manufacturer instructions. Describe on the protocol for late loaner trays in advance and hold the team accountable for it. Document whether or not the procedures will be delayed until loaner sets are properly and fully processed in order to be compliant. Determine how many trays will be processed to adhere to the manufacturer written guidelines. And include both the operating room and the sterile processing department. So many times we don't consider getting the SPD involved, when in fact they are the people that need to be involved, as well as the operating room. Risk management and infection prevention needs to also be involved, as well as purchasing and materials management, I believe, can contribute to having input to the protocol and how to enforce it. Consider including consequences for non-adherence. Vendors do not comply with delivery times, then how are we going to deal with that? ISHM has developed a loaner policy example, and all you have to do is you just go to the ISHM website and you can pull down the example that they do have, and it is an excellent beginning for your policy and procedure. Have a protocol and please enforce it. Having a protocol and not enforcing it, you might as well not go through the pain of even establishing the protocol. The protocol would include ordering, transporting instruments in, checking instruments into SP, pre-procedure processing, charging if it's applicable. Some may not charge and others may be charging. Post-procedure processing is another step that we need to include in our protocol. Checking instruments out, transporting instruments out, and accountability. Record keeping is a must, and the Joint Commission will be looking at this as they do their tracer methodologies. When they track that patient from admission to surgery to discharge, they will be visiting the Sterile Processing Department for those surgical patients. Instruments delivered with sufficient time to permit facility disassembly, cleaning, packaging, and sterilization. The inventory list, manufacturing, reprocessing instructions, date and time received in the facility, as well as your quality checks. Remember, you must do quality checks, even with your vendor trays. Cleaning and decontamination after the tray has been used. Maintenance of complete records. You need to hang on to your records. Items received as single-use devices from the vendor. If those devices have been opened, consider them trash, because you cannot reprocess those single-use devices unless you have been validated by the FDA to do so. An arrangement for replacement of any damaged or lost instruments. That's why when you get your trays into SPD, you're going to run that inventory checklist. You want to know what was brought in, and then you want to know what you are shipping out back to that vendor. Items to consider when developing the policy. Where are the trays coming from? Are they coming directly from the vendor or the manufacturer? Are they coming from the vendor manufacturer via courier? Or are they coming from another hospital site? You need to understand where all of that fits into your development of your policy. How will you get the information you are required to have for correct and complete set contents? Do you want to check in and check out photos? I never ever took photos of the trays, but I certainly had an inventory sheet that I would use to check the instruments in, and then again to check those instruments out with the manufacturer rep. You need to set the weight on these trays, and I can tell you there's a lot of Lunar trays out there that still weigh in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 pounds. You need to get the set down to 25 pounds. Now, you can't just start doing that on your own, because remember, the manufacturer has validated his process, those instructions for use that he's going to give you. However, we do have gold standards that have been established by AORN and by AMI that say 25 pounds is the max weight that we can possibly sterilize this tray. So please, if you're still trying to sterilize these heavy trays, you need to be getting with your vendor, and you need to get the trays broken down into more trays. Instructions for use from the manufacturer, and please remember again, I have had vendors come in that evening and say, oh, I forgot to bring in the instructions for use, but this is how you do it. That's when you look at them and say, well, this is how we do it. If we don't have a written instructions for use, then we can't sterilize your trays. You will find that this is the best medicine for those kinds of instances when you run into a vendor that doesn't provide that instructions for use. You have to remember, litigation in this country is rampant, and you know, if you do something to a tray and it has an adverse effect on a patient, your facility and maybe you will end up in litigation in the court system. Education for processing and end users prior to the time of surgery. These processes must be included in your competency validation for each staff member. Every staff member that handles your loaner trays needs to be proficient, and they need to know how these trays are processed. And how can you document that to the Joint Commission? By your competency checklist. What about the regulatory requirement? Are there any? Well, yeah, I would assume that we will probably have a lot of regulatory requirements. The Joint Commission is now getting very, very involved with what we're doing and how we're doing things in the Sterile Processing Department. Now remember, if in fact you don't follow the gold standards in either developing policy or following through with what you're doing, you can be held liable for anything that would adversely affect the patient. So what are best practices? Best practices include tray weights matter. They matter because we cannot and we should not ever try to process those trays that weigh over weight limits. Now, the other thing I want to point out is in your trays and in your IFUs, they need to arrive 48 to 72 hours prior to surgery. Now, why is that? That's because you may have a brand new tray that comes in and you have never done a product family on that particular tray. It may not be close to anything that you are sterilizing now. That tray you must check and do your quality testing, and we're going to do that through product testing. And Amy can walk you through that. They have a great procedure that you can follow right in the Amy guidelines. There are key steps that you need to do in preparing the loaner tray. You have to clean it. You have to inspect it and do your inventory. You have to assemble, or maybe you have to disassemble certain items in that tray. Then you're going to wrap it, or you're going to have it in a container, sterilize it at the appropriate cycle time, remembering that not every single tray may have the very same cycle time. We can have cycle times from 4 to 40 minutes. So you have to know in your IFU what is required from that manufacturer that provided that tray to you. Then you must allow for proper cooling. You cannot take that hot tray and run it right up to the operating room because you have literally contaminated that tray. Remember, when you handle hot trays, we have what we call a wicking effect from handling it with our hands. And what happens is we wick the organisms right into the center of our trays. And we don't want to do that because now we have a contaminated tray. We have a patient that will most likely or could end up with a surgical site infection, and that's what we have to be very, very careful about. So let your trays all cool. Now, trays may take up to an hour to cool. If that's what it's going to take, that's what you need to know in advance of getting the trays up to surgery. And you must quarantine sets that have implants. So remember, if you must release an implant prematurely, you need to fill out that premature release form that Amy can give you an example of, or you can make up your own, documenting why that had to be premature released and what can you do about not having to ever do that again. The Joint Commission will look at this, I can guarantee it. So, and remember, we don't flash implants. Flashing implants we cannot do because they haven't been validated by the manufacturer that they can be flash sterilized. Now, in the event that the manufacturer has validated, yes, you can indeed flash sterilize that, and I have no idea of anyone out there that can do this. You do not release implants early. You wait that until your biological results are there and you have a negative biological. Each load containing an implantable device should be monitored with a BI and quarantined until the results of the BI test are available, up to a year after surgery. That's an AORN document in their standards, and there you can see what that standard is. Best practices. A tray weight matters. We've got to remember that overweight trays we're just not going to try to process because there's such a thing as what we call metal mass. Steam can only do so much. And when your metal mass is greater than your steam penetration, all you're creating is superheated steam, and all that's going to do is give you a non-sterile tray. So be sure that you separate overweight trays. Check with your manufacturer before you use a rigid sterilization container or other packaging methods. Don't just do that on your own. You need to be working with the manufacturer in getting those tray weights down to 25 pounds. Consult the vendor on reconfiguration to help with OR case efficiency. Best practices also include immediate use steam sterilization should only be used for spatial use. Immediate use steam sterilization used only in emergency situation with a rapid action biological with a class 5 chemical integrating indicator. Again, that's an AORN standard, and we'll find that again in AMI. Develop guidelines on the definition of emergency situation, not just because we don't have enough. That's never an emergency situation. You have to define what in your facility are you going to consider an emergency situation. This is where you'll want to involve your infection preventionist nurse. Work with infection prevention, risk management, and your surgeons to develop the guideline. The surgeons need to know, as well as everyone else, what is the expectation on the trays. Documentation items that you need to consider. Who's the patient? Get the patient's first and last name. What is the item? What are the cycle parameters? The date and time of the cycle, the operator, and the reason. Again, that's an AORN recommendation. And remember, you just want the documentation for tracking the device back to the patient. And this is where we get into the Joint Commission's requirements. So be sure that you can track that tray back to your patient, either manually or through a great tracking system. So, considering automation, find a system that can help reinforce your facility's guidelines. Don't focus on just one side of the loaner tray journey. Make sure a system can provide reporting to provide feedback to all parties invested in the process, which would include the vendor, the surgeon, the infection preventionist, the risk manager, Sterile Processing Department, and the operating room. So what is the bottom line here? You must handle your loaner trays as if you are going to be the patient that those trays are going to be used on. Do you want a tray that has been haphazardly processed? Or do you want a tray that has been processed with the finest technicians in the world? I want to have the best sterile tray that can be achieved. And that's 99.99999% sterile. That's what I want. I don't want someone that's been taking shortcuts and cutting the processes to just try to get those trays pushed to the operating room. That's ethically and morally, that's wrong. Proper reprocessing done at the facilities in compliance with regulatory guidelines. We have those guidelines, and we must use those guidelines. And more, you know, when I started back 40 years ago, we never heard much about regulatory guidelines biting us in the rear. But today, every time I go to a facility to do an audit, I find lots and lots of regulatory issues. So if you're one of those, you know, get a hold of an expert that can help you. Get an expert that can help you develop this policy and these procedures so that you won't be caught with the Joint Commission or with the FDA in a whole lot of trouble. Sterilization processed accurately and accurately documented. Records must be clear. When I was going through nursing school, my instructor said, if it isn't documented, it wasn't done. So remember, that applies to the sterilization process as well. And let's have no case delays related to a late delivery of those items. Work with the vendors. Work with your surgeons. Work with your risk management, your infection preventionists, your OR and SPD. And I just want to add that you want to ensure that your staff competencies are up to date. For all staff that are involved with loaner trays or devices, and ensure you have completed product testing on the trays and devices that you process or sterilize in your facility. Thank you for your attention, and I will now turn it back to Jennifer.
Okay, so we're ready to take some questions. Have a few.
Yes, we do, Jennifer. We have a couple of questions that have come in, but I do want to remind all of our attendees today, you can still submit your question for this Q&A portion. Please do so either using the chat feature or the question feature on your dashboard. But the first question, Ski, it's addressed to you. What are the most common challenges you see related to loaner programs in general?
Oh my gosh, and trying to whittle it down to one might be kind of difficult, but I think if I had to whittle it down to one, it would probably be that it would be, do you have any of the following issues? Do you have I think policy and procedure is really vital, and I don't see a lot of that being done when it comes to loaner trays. In the audits that I have done around the country, I have found that, my goodness, we aren't where we need to be. But advancing surgical technology will often make borrowed surgical instruments complex to process and use. The instrumentation may be unfamiliar to sterile processing staff, and it will necessitate following detailed reprocessing instructions. Complex devices often will require difficult multi-step cleaning, disassembling, and packaging, as well as, don't forget, you may have an extended sterilization cycle as well as an extended drying time. So I see that, and gosh, you know, I could probably do a whole seminar on that one question because there's so many different things that need to be done, and they need to be done in unity with one another. But certainly having those IFUs is truly important.
Great. Next question, Jennifer, was designated for you. Is the loaner template you mentioned fairly comprehensive in your opinion, or is it more of a starting point?
So I think that's referring, we mentioned in the presentation that ISHM has published a loaner policy template. And, you know, based on feedback from what our analysts, when they go out and conduct assessments, I think the guideline would be that that includes everything you really need to start with, and it covers everything that should, you know, be in a policy. So it gives you a really good starting point. But just every facility is different and has their own processes and does things just a little bit differently. So I guess the recommendation would be use that if you're starting from scratch as your template, and then just tailor it and customize it based on, you know, the way you might not need parts of it, or, you know, just make it sure it fits your facility, you know, as a custom document. So.
Great. We do have another question here, Ski. This one was for you. What is the #1 thing we need to make sure our loaner management policy includes?
Oh, goodness. In an effort to reduce the risk of associated loaner items, such as surgical site infections and hospital-associated infections, the healthcare facility personnel should develop a standardized, thorough system for handling loaner instruments, implants, as well as equipment that they get into their facility. And the successful loaner management system will begin with a well-known multidisciplinary policy. The policy would be intradepartmental, and it would be developed in concert with all the stakeholders, which would include your surgeons, your personnel from OR and SPD, personnel from infection prevention and risk management, quality assurance, safety, and the purchasing departments. So I see it as a combination of ordering. You should have an ordering policy, transportation policy, checking in, and pre-procedure processing requirements. That would probably be where I would have to start, because that would be the beginning of the process of getting those trays in.
Great. I have one additional question for you, Ski. Do you have a recommendation for identifying loaners without placing labels on the tray themselves? I have found some manufacturers do not want tracking labels put on their sets because they are used at other facilities.
You can use matter of fact, Rose Seavey actually started using a card system in her facility at Children's a long time ago when things started getting really heated. And she would be able to walk them through that, how she did that. I'm not familiar enough with it to be able to tell you how to use it, but I can tell you that there is another method of doing it, and that certainly is going to take more time than just using a tracking system. But
I can add also our Census system, the label, the way we print labels, and they can be custom. You can print off a label that can be attached to a hang tag, and sometimes those are easier to attach to your loaner set.
Yep, right on the handle.
Or the wrapping on top, you know, you can apply them to the wrapping on top of a loaner set. So labels have really progressed to, I mean, you have a lot of options out there now, so, you know, we have worked with different vendors to try to accommodate the new solutions that come out specifically for loaner sets. They're, you know, everyone's trying to get creative because, like the vendor said, they don't want to have to peel all those labels off either when they get them back.
Well, right, because you don't want to take in anything that's got a bunch of sticky old labels on them, because you're going to have to clean those all off. But certainly there's a way to manage the labels that can be scanned. And like Jennifer just said, you know, they're very easy to pull off of the handles of your containers, and then on trays, those could be taped right to the wrap. So there's really ways to do it. And remember that with the Joint Commission's involvement, you want to be able to track that tray or all 30 of those trays to the patient that those instruments were used on. Now, if you don't track them somehow, you're going to get into trouble with that, because they say they want to know from the beginning to the end of what all was involved with taking care of the patient. So if you're not tracking those loaner trays, please start, because you will get a Type 1 recommendation from the Joint Commission, and none of us like to get those. So work with Census or you know, work with your vendors, but do follow those trays with your patient.
All right, ladies, thank you. I have another question. Jennifer, this one is for you. Is there a software application developed that can link with tracking systems that could be visible by the OR or other departments to see where a tray is in the process? Good for same-day turnovers, fast track for emergencies, etc.
So, you know, with CensiTrack, with our loaner management module right now, that's part of our CensiTrack system, we do give the OR visibility to what's happening inside the reprocessing loop. So the OR doesn't need to make a phone call. They can go into the system themselves and track what's happening inside, you know, the hospital once it's been dropped off. And we would love for you, if you're coming to ISHM, to stop by our booth, because we will be announcing enhancements to our loaner module. I mean, we really have focused in on the need for our customers to have full visibility to everything in the loaner set journey. We've been working on it for quite some time, and we're really excited to have a peek at the ISHM booth of our enhancements that will be coming out later this summer.
Wonderful. I appreciate your time today. Thank you, Ski and Jennifer. And thank you again to our sponsor for today's webinar, Censis Technologies. One lucky attendee today will win lunch for their department. For a chance to win, please submit your post-webinar survey, which will appear on your screen shortly. If you do not see your survey, email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. One survey will be selected at random to win lunch for their department. You must complete the survey also to obtain your certificate of attendance. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you next month for OR Today's webinar.